Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Coming up on The Payoff, Arlina Allen is a force of nature. She trumpets 3 decades of sobriety. She actually doesn't trumpet it. I am trumpeting it here. She's extremely humble. She's got the 3 decades of sobriety, and she has the unique experience of being an alcoholic and an addict in addition, which led to a bottom, ultimately bringing about those 3 decades of sobriety. She is a self-help junkie. That's one of her 2 podcasts. It is called Self-Help Junkie. We got all the podcasts in the show notes. ArlinaAllen.com is where you can go to get all her information, but you don't want to go anywhere because she's one of those people who, when you finish talking to her, you feel better about yourself. And if you're looking for hope and trying to find sobriety or just trying to get another day, this is the podcast for you. Arlina Allen coming up. But first, Kevin Souza. I guess my first question for you is, when we talked on the phone the other day, you're by the way, I appreciate how efficient you are. It's like the Tonight Show. We do a pre-interview, and I talk to you, and that's the kind of stuff that's really a blessing, just connecting with people in life like you, but connecting with people in sobriety is really what it's all about. And I got off the phone with you, and I felt a little lighter. So I can imagine, so I can imagine people have that feeling a lot. You're one of those people when I'm finished talking with you or people are done talking to you, they feel probably better about themselves.
That is the nicest thing that you could have ever said to me. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the truth. And here we are 1 minute in. So I set the bar high. But one of the things you revealed to me in that convo is 30 years you have been sober. So take me back to your childhood growing up. What was it like for you? You grew up in the San Jose area. How was your upbringing?
Yeah, so I did grow up in the San Jose area, specifically Sunnyvale, which seems so California, right? Sunnyvale, California. And my parents are super nice people. My mother's from Mexico City, daddy's from Kentucky. So I occasionally lapse into the Southern accent for no reason. But super nice people. Never saw them drinking or exhibiting any kind of behavior in that regard. My dad was like a military guy. He was in the Marines. He worked for places like, he used to call companies outfits. He's like one of those old guys. It's like, it's an outfit. So he worked for like Lockheed and NASA and government jobs where at the end he couldn't tell me what he was doing. So he was kind of a serious guy, super, super religious, but just a good dude. Like my dad was a good dude. And mom, she was kind of the ass kicker in the family. Am I allowed to say that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she was kind of the disciplinarian. But there was a couple of things in childhood that kind of set the tone for the rest, right? So I had actually been sexually abused by a neighbor from the time I was about 5 years old on. And then my parents divorced when I was 7. So these are like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the ACEs score, the Advanced Childhood Experiences. These are things that would qualify as, trauma. And that really set the stage for who I thought I was as a person, like my self-worth, my self-esteem, who I thought I was in the world.
And who did you think you were as a kid growing up? Because it sounds like that sets the table for some, like you said, serious trauma, but also some serious, I guess, for lack of a better word, like even I have stuff that in my childhood that makes me delusional today about who I am.
That's such a good word, delusional. Yeah.
So how did that set the table for you?
So it's kind of interesting. I didn't realize until way after I got sober. You go to meetings, and you get asked to tell your story, and I would always joke around that that when I was little, I grew up in the church, and it was like I was always trying to be good, but that, God never fixed me. So I decided that if I couldn't be good, that I'd be good at being bad. And, I would say it like in a joking way, like, oh, I'm going to be good at being bad. But there's like this kernel of sad truth that I thought I was bad, that thought I was broken in some way. And these messages were getting reinforced at places like church, when it's like, oh, you're a sinner. You need to be fig, your puny human mind can't grasp the vastness of God's love. It's like, you need to be saved. You're bad. So it was like all those kinds of messages. I think at my very core, I thought I was a bad person.
And so this stuff happens. You mentioned the sexual abuse. You mentioned the divorce. At some point, like, you have to realize that this stuff was really, really bad. And the first one, deplorable. Was there a time, was that before you got sober, or was it afterwards?
That I sort of was coming to, like, wrestling with what happened.
Yeah. I mean, because that's kind of stuff. Look, in my experience, we just stuff it away.
Yeah, and I had never heard anybody talk about it the way it had happened to me, because it was a woman, and it was an older child, I should say, not a woman. I'm sorry. It was an older child, but she's female. And so I never heard of anybody talking about abuse in the way I experienced. So I really thought it was my fault. Right. And it wasn't until years into recovery that I was able to, like, look back at that and be like, oh, at 5 years old, you can't give consent. I didn't understand. I didn't understand what was happening, to be perfectly honest. And so it wasn't until much later in sobriety, and it's like, wow, how did I not realize that it wasn't my fault, that was actually abuse.
Yeah, when you're in it,
it took a long time to come to grips.
When you're in it, you're in it, especially when you're, a preteen or a teenager. For me, I was never, and that's where the alcohol and the drugs comes in. I was slow developing, period. And by the time I actually did start to develop, it was alcohol and drugs way more than it should have been, and then all the time. For you, when was your first experience of the mood or mind-altering substance?
Dude, I was really young. I was about, it had to be before I was 10. I still don't really know exactly how old I was, but it was before my mom had met my stepdad, and I was 10. I remember I was 10 because that's when he gave me, like, my first, journal or whatever. So it happened before that. And I remember it. God, I remember it like it was yesterday, because I remember, like, before you do something naughty, you get you get all excited, like, ooh, we're going to do something bad.
Yes, yeah.
All that, the anticipation and excitement. I'm going to do something really bad. But so my mom had gone out to dinner, like people do. And I have a sister that was 2 years older than me. So she and I were left home alone. And I decided to go for this bottle that was in the cabinet. It was like this dusty old bottle. Probably somebody left it from a party or something. But I just remember it was a clear bottle with brown liquid. And I was like, I'm drinking some of that. And so I mixed it with juice. I remember that first drink like it was yesterday, the way it burned my lips, the way it burned all the way down. But then that warmth spread through my whole body. And suddenly, like, all that self-loathing and self-consciousness and really self-hatred, all of a sudden, all of that was lifted, and all I felt was really good. And I didn't realize how bad I felt until I felt really good. And the juxtaposition of those two feelings, the contrast was so stark that it was like burned in my psyche forever. Like, this is something that I want. And that's how it all started before 10.
And so marijuana is a big part of your story. When did that start? When did that, a huge part. When did that come into play?
So I was probably about 14 when I started smoking weed, and I started smoking weed pretty regularly with a pastor's daughter.
Yeah.
She was my idol. Oh my God. You know what she told me one time, Pete? She goes, I'm high so often that not being high is my altered reality. And I was like, I want to be just like you.
I feel like that's something addicts say, and other bonehead addicts find that to be alluring, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but man, but comfortably numb. That was like my theme song. Loved it. Just loved not feeling. That was like my goal in life. Don't feel anything.
Question for me, I started to smoke a little bit when I was like in high school, and then it really ramped up, and then it was one of those things. By the time I was a senior, it was if any time I could do it, and if it was all day, all the time, that was just fine. But it took me a minute to get there. Like there were a lot of there was like a bug out stage. For you, did it click right away? Like was it enjoyable right away?
No, I was kind of like there was something about it that I liked, but I did like the bug out stage. It's like you have those first few times where you're just like a little bit paranoid, and I was like, let me just keep trying this. I'll try anything twice. But in those days, it was like, yeah, I don't know. There was something about it that I just loved pretty much from the gate. But obviously I wasn't smoking every day at age 14, but it like ramped up all through high school. And by the time I was out of high school working full time, I had some money. I was always working. I've always had, several jobs. That's just my nature, and always had money for weed and always was smoking.
Were you an achiever in high school? As far as like, if I look at your grades and I look at what you're doing outside of school, could I tell that you were somebody who had a warm fuzzy feeling and relationship with alcohol before 10, and somebody who had been started to experiment with weed and then ultimately doing it a lot by the time you're like 14, whatever?
I was never at risk for being in any AP classes. I wasn't that girl. I
Yeah.
just was not that girl. My boys and socializing, that's all I really cared about. Um, so it wasn't like anyone was gonna mistake me for a AP student.
Well, how about like your relationships with boys? For me, alcohol, and people who listen to this podcast know I talk about it, but that was a vehicle to relationships with women. It just was. Alcohol, without it, I could not talk to the opposite sex. With it, I could. I always say going to an 8th grade dance, I was so terrified to get there. And then I started to drink in 9th and 10th grade, and I couldn't wait to show up at those social engagements. It was such a dramatic change. And my ability to talk to people really changed too. How about yourself? Where did that come into
Yeah,
play?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I would occasionally drink before school, like in junior high and stuff. But when you ask about boys, it's like I thought there were two things that were going to save me. I thought it was either men or money, right? And the men thing started out young, right? Like I sometimes kind of encapsulate my whole sort of using experience by saying that if it was in a bottle, a bag, or blue jeans, I was doing it because I just wanted to change how I felt. And I got a lot of external validation from men, for a long time. Like that's where I got my validation. Like it was either through achievement, through work, not so much during school. That all kind of came later, but it was based off of what I look like and how much money I could make. It was like all performance based, and that comes from like childhood, right? Like, excuse me, growing up. I wasn't like seen or heard, but if I was achieving or performing, then I would get like that validation, and that kind of carried through, and it kind of transferred onto men, where I thought if I looked a certain way, acted a certain way, then I would get that validation, and really I was searching for love, but like the country song says, is you're looking for love in all the wrong
All
places.
the wrong places, and unfortunately, just like I can do today in recovery, it's you're looking for it outside, right? It's like, how
Right.
can I fill this huge hole in my soul with other stuff, when there's really a spiritual answer, right? Like the spiritual malady and connecting with other people with like authentic, genuine relationships that can fill that void. Before you ended up stopping, your life continues to evolve, I would imagine. Like you mentioned, you're someone who men want to be with, right? You're getting validation as far as that front is concerned. When did it sort of start to turn for you? When you realize, okay, I'm drinking too much. I'm definitely smoking too much weed. And from the moment you noticed that it was a problem, How long did it take you to stop? Because for me, that was like 20, that was like 20 years, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it definitely was a process. I would say that I was having, you know how they say it's fun at first and then fun with problems and then problems at the end. I was definitely fun with problems for, you know, for the majority of my 20s. Like I quit when I was 25.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which, by the way,
for
if you start when you were 14, or that's a pretty good run. I mean, not that it matters.
11,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, if you got it, you
11
got it,
years.
and it's best to stop as soon as you can. But sometimes we start so early that a decade plus of abuse of substance is way too long. You know, it's a decade too long.
It was too long. It was a lot of suffering. It was a lot of needless suffering. And I always, you know what's funny, Pete, is I always wanted to be different. I always wanted to be somebody else. Like I just wanted to be anybody else but me, which is why I was always seeking like this external validation, right? And because I was like thinking money was going to solve my problems, you know, I worked really hard, and I was in this outside sales position, and two of my customers were in the program. And that was right about the time that I had had like this incident with my sister that was really dark. It got physical. I physically hurt her. I could have done some damage. I humiliated myself in public, and
There was,
the police
I'm
were,
guessing there was substance involved in this.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
so, I was like blackout drunk,
Were
and
you
somebody
guys
was supposed
out
to.
at like a bar or at a party?
Yeah, we were out at a bar, and the what happened was I was kind of burning through all my friends. You know, my bad behavior was like people were getting tired of my
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
nonsense, my nonsense, shall we say? They're getting sick of it.
As you get older too, it's like, of course, these
It's not
people have
cute.
lives. They're starting to have families. They have integrity, and they get around people like us. Like they're
Standards.
like, whoa, 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 like we become like Martians. And it's at some point, it's like, you know what, I have to cut this person off, and all of a sudden our life gets pretty small as an addict. So that's, I can appreciate what you just said. Sorry, I cut
My
you off,
life
but yeah,
was no, it's
yeah.
okay. No, my life got small. That is a fair statement. And
So you said you're burning through your friends. You're out with
so I
your
was burned through
sister.
my friends, and so I dragged my sister out one night. And I was supposed to be meeting this guy that I was kind of seeing. And he was like the best friend of this married policeman I had been dating. It was messy. I was messy. So anyway, so I take her out. Proceed to get blackout drunk, and the guy doesn't show. So I'm livid. I'm victim mental, you know, I'm victim mode. I'm a mess. And we come home and we pass the married cop ex-boyfriend doing a field sobriety test. By the way, that was the only reason I never went to jail, is because I was dating a married policeman. Every time I got pulled over, I'd hand over his business card and they would let me go. 4 times that happened, and they would let me go. Anyways, so we pass by this guy, and I lose my ever-loving mind. And I punch the windshield in a couple places and break it. I try to crash the car, try to jump out. My sister trying to keep me in the car. We make it like 2 blocks from home. And I don't know what happened. I think I kick her in the face while she's driving, give her a bloody nose. And we're like down the street from some childhood friend. They come outside and they're trying to calm me down. And listen, this is all secondhand information because
Sure.
I don't remember most of this. This is what she tells me the next day. And that is the point that I started to question my drinking. The next morning, my hand was black and blue, and the guy that was supposed to be at the bar was there. And I was like, how did you even get here? What happened? And he's like, you better call your sister. She's really upset. So I go over to my mom's house where my sister was living, and she was so pissed at me. And my mom, now my mom knows everything. And they are just so like disgusted with me. And I was so full of shame. And she was like, I'm going to go to Al-Anon. And here's the crazy part. I was like clutching my pearls. I was like, because of me? Like I was, what are you talking about? I just had one bad night. No, ma'am. I had many, many bad nights. And so that's when I was like, oh my God, maybe I am an
How old were you at
alcoholic.
that time?
I was 23.
Yeah, so you put together
and I
2
didn't
more
get sober
years
till I
after
was,
that.
yes. So that began my period of moderation. I had to answer the question, can I moderate? I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that's what, looking back, I was like, oh, I was trying to shoot every angle I could because I just could not see a life without drugs and alcohol. I wanted to quit. Like I was doing all these like Tony Robbins seminars and Harvey Mackey. Like I wanted to be a good salesperson.
Well, you are
and
you're a self-help guru. And
junkie. Yes.
now you're part of the self-help market, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I talked about it off the top in the intro, but you are the type of person that people now go to when they're seeking. But at this point, you're talking about you're seeking. And for me, at the end of the day, I could do anything I wanted to that I saw as self-help or evolution. But until I got sober, none of that mattered. And it was an exhausting, repeating cycle.
Exhausting. It was, I mean, it was a tough, but listen, I didn't think that it was alcohol that was my problem. I was reading books like Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And I was doing Tony Robbins workshop, Awaken the Giant Within. I was like, yes, that's what I need to do. But it was funny because I do like these personal growth workshops, and always at the top of the list was stop smoking weed, stop drinking. And I just couldn't do it until I met these two guys that I worked with that were like, hey, I saw my job as making friends. Like I felt like that was my job. I'd make friends with these people and then they would use our services and we would hang out. And
what did you do?
I would tell them like, I was working for a transportation company. So I was in sales. I was working with these guys like in shipping and receiving. So it was mostly men I was talking to. And these two guys were just like these fine, upstanding men of, the 12-step program. And they would just like gently share things like, oh, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting. And the definition of insanity and just like all these little bits of wisdom that like I was seeking answers, but they were giving me answers to questions I wasn't asking yet. And they were starting to open my mind in this really gentle way. And so after, I think it was after my 25th birthday when I just, another blackout, I was like, another one of those.
I'm smiling. And if people are just listening to the audio, they can't see it. But I mean, this is such a Me Too deal. I had so many mornings where I woke up and was like, oh, it's just the worst feeling. And I had many of those. I had a really low bottom. So I had many of those mornings where it was, you think it can't get any worse. And then it does. And I'm not saying that's your story, but so many of those mornings when you open, I remember just opening that one eye and being like, oh man. And you'd see somebody like you mentioned, like the guys next to you or somebody who is disappointed in you. And yeah.
Someone's feelings I hurt, hurting people I love. And it was shocking how bad I could feel. Like I didn't think I could feel any worse. And then I did. And it wasn't like I had a fancy apartment. I had a car. I had, you know what I mean? I had like some things, but I felt so low. I felt so bad about who I was and I couldn't escape myself. I just couldn't get away and I couldn't change. And I was like, I am so broken. Like and it's never going to end. Do you know what I mean? Like that's kind of where I was at.
So I'm
broken and it's never going to end.
And so after like your 25th birthday, you say was maybe another blackout or around that time, right? That's what you mentioned.
Yes.
And so
another blackout. And next morning.
Oh, was that your rock bottom? What happened?
I would say, yeah. I mean, the next morning I woke up and I'd been dating this guy who I thought was my ideal. This poor guy. Like I could tell I was losing this relationship due to my drinking. And, he had a really bad night on my birthday and woke up the next morning and I looked at him and I'm like, I am never going to drink again. And I haven't, but I took a big bong hit. I was like, I needed to, my stomach was really upset and that was like the perfect cure for it. Right.
Yeah.
So And then that's when my friends at work started taking me to meetings.
So
Somebody was
you
like,
stop.
"Hey,
I love these moments. So you stop. You tell him, "I'm never going to drink again." You take the bong hit, and at what point do you realize that, like, and this is, look, you and I talked about this too offline, like when we chatted earlier this week. It's different for everybody, and there's different ways to do this. There's not, like, I'm not saying there's one way. I know it worked for me,
right.
and it was total abstinence, and it was through 12 steps, right? But so you take that bong hit. What changes? What do you do that leads to the life you're at now? And I'm not talking about, we can get into what you do now and what you did right after, but what happens immediately after that?
Yeah, so immediately after, I didn't know it, but I was practicing harm reduction. Like I still had all these feelings and I just didn't know what to do with them. And smoking weed really like helped me regulate my feelings, and I just was like, I just kind of just was done. I just couldn't drink anymore. And I knew it. And it took 5 months before I went to my first meeting. But as soon as I walked into that room, and listen, there was not, this is 30 years ago.
Yeah.
There was nothing else available to me. I wasn't really even aware of rehab. Like I guess I kind of knew people went, but it wasn't like I had access to that.
Sure,
Like
you
I
didn't
didn't
have.
have any
I was lucky
resources.
because I had people. I mentioned this to you. One of my best buddies went to rehab when he was 17, and I was 18, and I saw him get sober, and
Wow.
I saw his life start to change. And then one of my brothers got sober. Then another brother got sober. So I did see it happening around me, and I was addicted to, like, documentaries or any news story about someone who had had a drug problem and turned their life around. That's why I was so pumped about starting this podcast and talking with people like
Yeah.
you, for real, because there was a point in
Yeah.
time where I wasn't ready to walk into any rooms yet. So I would just kind
Yeah.
of drop in, right, through watching a documentary or an interview. And then you do walk in. And it's a meeting, and it's 12 steps, and that's all there is. I would imagine too, when you walk in, there probably weren't a ton of women.
I think there were some. I did go to a mixed meeting. It was like 40 minutes outside my town.
You don't want to see anybody you knew?
Yeah, my buddy was like, "Come to a meeting with me," and I knew, and he lived in in another town, like in San Jose.
Mhm.
Like it would take me an hour to drive 16 miles. You know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
like traffic was not great. But anyway, it took me a while to get to this meeting because that's where he went. That was like his home group. And so I went, and there were some women in there. I think I would have been a little intimidated if there were
Mhm.
no women in there. But it was just like it wasn't like nice or anything, but it was like this hall, and it was brightly lit, and there was like tables in a U shape, and there was like one of those big stainless steel pots of coffee and cookies, and then a bunch of pamphlets and things like that. And it kind of felt like a church meeting to be honest. I walk in, I sit down, I kind of know the drill. But they talked about the newcomers. Oh, welcome to the newcomers. And I felt all eyes looking at me, and I was like, "Don't look at me." It was so. Um, but they started saying, like, I could see people like before the meeting, how people hug each other and people were laughing and chatting and just happy to be there. And they sit down and someone starts talking, and they welcomed me, and then they started telling stories. And I remember seeing other women and just like normal looking people. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I thought these would be people like fresh out of jail or something. Like I don't really know what I was expecting, but they were like nice, clean cut. I mean, there were some of those there,
Sure.
but do you know what I mean? Like some of them look nice, and then what was interesting is I would see these nice looking people tell these stories about the people they used to be, and I could not reconcile the story with the person that was in front of me because I was like, there's no way that that person acted that way. But in fact, they had. And I was like, oh my God, I'm home. Like immediately, I was like, I'm home. Like these people get my kind of crazy. They were speaking my language. They were saying things that they had words for feelings I didn't know I had. Do you know what I mean? I just felt like this, my center of gravity just lowered. I suddenly felt grand, and I was like, I'm going to be okay.
Did your age move you to compare yourself out at all, or were there other young people in there as well?
Um, I don't remember feeling that way.
Well, then that's
I
no.
do. I do.
I would imagine, right? Like if you don't remember that feeling, I would say you probably didn't compare yourself out because you did say you felt like you were home.
I did. I felt safe with older people, to be honest. Like there were like older people, and for some reason, I just felt safe with them. Like they weren't going to mess with me on any kind of level. There wasn't going to be any jealousy from the young girls, or granted there were some some shady characters there. The ladies would pull me aside and like, be
I
careful.
always tell people, they're like, I'm like, first of all, it's not the mental board of health, okay? Like it's just not. Second of
Not the
all,
hotbed, no.
and I notice it too. That's when I know I haven't been getting to plugging into like the 12-step recovery I need. AA, I get the book behind me. Like that's for me. I know when I haven't been getting to enough meetings when I walk into a meeting and I expect it to be like a goddamn boardroom, like, and somebody's like distracting or getting up or walking around or acting kind of nutty. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? It's like, dude, I have to remind myself, like anybody can walk through those doors, man. Like,
Yeah.
chill out, like love everyone. And if somebody's creating a complete distraction, then handle it. But up until then, settle down. And I can usually
Down.
I can usually get back into a groove. But you talk about that, like your experience, you kind of find your tribe. Then what happens to you in recovery? Like what do you start to do that starts to change who Arlina is?
Yeah, what's interesting as I kept hearing people talk about doing steps. They said you need to do 90 and 90. It was recommended, right?
Yeah.
It's like you
Yeah.
hear these things over and over again. The women work with the women, the men work with the men. And now I understand why, when you're finally getting real and honest and you're bearing your soul and getting really vulnerable, it's important to be with people that are safe. It's transference is a thing. And so, I think that's why they really recommend that the women work with the women. And I was like, what? Because all of my, I spent a lot of time and energy decorating the outside. And when I said I needed to go work with the women, I was
Yeah.
like, I felt like I had nothing on the inside. I was like, what could I possibly offer another woman? Like I had no idea. I didn't have any weed. Like they wanted, like that's how I made friends before, that they didn't want that. So, but I was so desperate to be sober. I was like, okay, I'll get a female sponsor. And the way I chose is this woman remembered my name the second time she met me. Like Arlina is not an easy name to remember, but she remembered my name. And I'm telling you, Pete, it was like the clouds parted and the sun was shining on her. It was like the angels were singing. Oh, and like this was the one. And it was so funny because I kept hearing that I was going to have to do this 4-step, and people were doing steps 1, 2, and 3 and relapsing because the 4-step is kind of intense. It's perceived to be this intense thing. And I was so desperate to be sober. I asked that lady, I said, would you listen to my inventory? And she said, bless her heart, she said, I would be honored. And we're going to start with step 1.
Oh.
And that's what we did. And she's like, I'm going to assign you homework. And when you're done with your homework, we'll meet. But if you're not done with your homework, we'll just reschedule until you're done. But she would like give me a deadline, and then we would meet. And I would remember I'm obsessively early. So I'd like get there early and wait, and she would show up. She showed up every time.
Yeah.
And it was always a surprise to me. And we would do these steps. And like, I was all in. I did everything that she asked me to do. And what was really interesting about the 4-step, that was the first time I really had like an actual pragmatic process to sort through all my baggage, right? I didn't ever have a way to process all these unresolved feelings of resentment and anger. I was like, and the analogy that they always get, it's like you walk through life and you can get it like a little resentment, and you think you don't know what to do with it. You don't resolve it, metabolize it to resolution. So you like put it in a sack, sling that thing over your back, and you just walk through life. But that over time, that weight will just break you. You trip over one little thing and it just breaks you. And that's kind of where I was at. So she gave me this process of sorting through all my stuff. And what I didn't realize is that when I had the opportunity to do a 4-step for the first time, it was license to bitch. I got to complain about all these people who did did me wrong. And she had to sit there and listen. She had to listen to all my bullshit. But it was so funny because I got to talk about how it affected me. Like, she had me get really specific about the causes, because we were like causes and conditions, cause and effect. And then I talked about how it affected me. Like, I saw for the first time that my self-esteem was taking hit after hit after hit. No wonder I hated who I was. No wonder. And riddled through all of that was like all these fears that I had. And then when it came to examining what my role was in that, well, I'll just tell you, Pete, it was rude. It was rude for her to confront me with the truth about who I
How
was.
dare they?
How dare she? We call
Yeah.
this spiritual rudeness where I come from, because on the other side of that is relief. And I started to see for the first time that I was not taking personal responsibility for myself. I was blaming others. And a lot of times people were reacting mean to me in response to something shitty I had done to them. Right. So it was like, oh, that awkward moment where you realize you're the asshole. Like, that's what happens. Like, all of a sudden, I was like seeing these patterns of behavior. And I was like, but it was, I got to tell you, when I left that room after doing all that work with her, I was like a free high. I have never felt so free in my entire life.
I
It was
had
amazing.
moments when I sat with my sponsor, Mike P., and it was in Hoboken, New Jersey, and we would read the book and we would talk about it. And then when it came time to do work, I did the work. And I described those as legit, like, white light moments. Like, I would be
Yeah.
talking to him, and like you mentioned, like, the light would just be hitting him a certain way. And I was like, wow, like, this is, and I would leave his place on Washington Avenue in North Jersey, and I would feel like I had wings, and I would want to talk to people. I wasn't scared. And I realized that there was an answer for this hole I had, and it felt better
Yeah.
than the alcohol and drugs, because there was a purity to it, and it was amazing. And it started to happen for me right when I started to be honest. Is that when it started to happen for you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Maybe just before the moment of honesty was like surrender,
Yeah,
right? Like, I was like, I just can't do this anymore. And I actually didn't know. There was I didn't know I was lying. Like, I had lied to myself so much about so many things. A lot of that was who I was. Like, who I thought I was actually a lie. Right. Like, I believed all these lies I was telling. Like, you're such a piece of shit. You're so stupid. Such a loser. It was like, that was like what my internal dialogue was like. And, I found out later, none of that was really true. None of it, you know? And I realized, I had people in my life who were like super compassionate. And so they would be like, of course she felt that way. Of course she did. And they created like this area of safety for me, that I was able to like just blossom, like let go of all these like defense mechanisms, all these masks I was wearing. Like, I could just let it go. Like, they would be vulnerable with me and be like honest. And it gave me the courage to respond in kind. So it was like honesty was kind of like, first it was surrender, and then it was vulnerability, and it kind of just took on a life of its own, really.
was there a major turning point in sobriety, like, outside the rooms of recovery, outside the way you felt? Was there an action step that you took that, for me, like, were you like towards the end, were you kind of like around the clock, like, for anything I had to do that I deemed like important, which honestly for me there was really not much important going on by the time I stopped. I mean, like, there was probably nothing. But if anytime I could drink or use before a moment, I would.
Yeah.
So when that was stripped from me, it was tough for me to start doing hard things, and
Yeah.
I used, obviously, a life of recovery to start to do those things. But was there anything that jumped out for you, whether it was early recovery or maybe a couple years or whatever, where you did something, almost looking back, it may have been a small thing, but it turns into a magical building block?
Um, I would say probably the one thing that I did right from the very beginning that I continue to do today is outreach. Like, I will pick up the phone and call someone. And, I was one of those self-centered people who loves to talk about herself still, apparently.
You're good at it, so.
But, like, I would be in pain, and these women were giving me their phone numbers, and they would say, if something goes on, call me. And so I would, and they would, sometimes I would call and I'd be like, I don't know what this feeling is. Like, I'm having a feeling. I don't know what this is. And they would talk me through. And then it was almost like they were talking me off the ledge a little bit. Right. And what I didn't know I was doing was I was processing my feelings to resolution. I needed to process out loud with somebody who was sane at that moment. Right. Like, if I'm all in fear and my brain's all hijacked, like, I can't even see straight. Like, I don't even know what is reasonable anymore. But I would talk to these women who were grounded, and that saying, like, it's a good thing we're not all crazy at the same time.
I've never heard that. That's terrific.
Yeah. So I had friends that were kind of following the same life path as me. We weren't all crazy at the same time, but when I felt crazy, I could call and they would help me process my feelings out loud. And that is something that I have continued to do to this day. And, I often suggest, like, when I'm working with other women, I have them do what I call willingness calls. And a willingness call is like, I'm willing to step outside my comfort zone and do something that is good for me. And I ask them to do it when they're feeling good, because we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. Right. So if I'm making
Gotcha.
willingness calls on a regular basis, then I'm creating a habit.
Yeah.
And then when the shit hits the fan, like it will, I'm already in the habit. Also, I'm current with several people so that I don't have to go into
to give all this context. Yeah.
I just go right into solution. Right. Yeah.
Especially like even today, if I get too sidetracked or whatever, and I'm unplugged, I'll have to call somebody and plug in, and as best I can in 3 or 4 minutes, catch them up, and then here's what happened. And by that time, I think that they're just like, what? So it is very good to stay current. Back to the monster, I would assume, or is the sexual trauma. How do you in sobriety address that? I mean, without getting too revealing, how do you realize that that's not your fault?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and I'm super comfortable talking about it. I think because I've talked about it so much, like, it doesn't
Takes away the power.
they call it like exposure therapy, where you talk about it so much that it begins to lose its power. And so I did a few different kinds of therapies. I did cognitive behavioral therapy, just where you just kind of talk things out. I've done EMDR, eye movement, desensitization reprocessing. That was super helpful for traumatic events. I did hypnotherapy, and that was like so powerful.
Which you do now.
I do now, yeah, just because it was so wild, this process of being able to go back to that time in my life and reprocess that experience or those experiences, and know that my essential self was never altered. Like, I'm still okay. Like, I'm evidence now that I survived. Like, I'm a grown woman now. I survived that. And so it's sort of like walking through that experience with your adult self, knowing that I was going to be okay. And not only okay, but those experiences had like hidden gifts, because I am particularly sensitive and aware to those situations, let's say. So when I work with women, I sense things, like, and I get it. So do you know what I mean? So it kind of made me uniquely qualified to help people. So I was able to turn something that was really difficult into like a superpower.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really good with this particular area.
Like, similar to that, I'll share something about myself that I don't know that I've ever shared this, but if I have in 12-step, but if I have a guy that I'm talking to and I can feel like he's got something similar to what you have, I'll start off doing a 5th step with the dude, talking about like the most powerful sexually traumatic incident that I've dealt with. Like, so as a sponsor, I'll be like, look, dude, let me just put this on the table for you so we can get to business, because, and another AA guy told me that, and it just sort of opens the door for everyone to understand, like, this is not only a safe place, but, you know, there's pretty much nothing that we can't navigate together in this space. And also, if I can't help you, we can find somebody who can. You know, and I think that's the one thing about recovery that I love, is like, we're not know-it-alls. We don't all have the same experiences, but if you've got something, I guarantee somebody has walked that life too, or walked that same path.
Yeah. 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 It's so interesting. I think just, you know, you said it, you know, when you share like the most vulnerable thing that you have to share, it just knocks the walls down. You just feel safe.
Yeah.
Right. You're meeting them at the level of the heart, and you're giving them permission to be who they are. This level of safety is so important. And I'll say not everybody is safe, but you get the sense of who you can trust. Like if you can trust your gut, like you really know who you can trust. And I've never been the kind of person to just be like I'm not really an advice giver so much as a truth teller. Like I'll tell you what's coming up for me, and you decide. Like there's this saying, you know, run the experiment. I'll share with you what worked for me, and you run the experiment. You tell me if it works or not.
Oh,
Right?
that's good. I like that.
Yeah, we just have a way of connecting with each other. I think that language, I think when people speak from their heart, it like crosses all boundaries in a good way.
Yeah. So
maybe barriers.
that's good. It breaks through barriers. So
barriers, yeah.
Let's get to some of the good stuff. You meet your husband in recovery, which, by the way, I've tried that experiment and failed it. So congratulations. and you've been married for how long?
So we got together. I was 5 months sober.
So it's clearly worked.
I mean, so far so good.
So far so good. Yeah. How was your experience finding a healthy relationship with someone of the opposite sex in sobriety?
Yeah, well, he wasn't the first one I dated. I'll tell you that much. Yeah, he wasn't the first one I dated. And it was so funny because I was single for like from 20 to 25. And then I had like this hostage for a year. Bless his heart. Bless his heart. And then he gets sober. And suddenly I had all these choices. Just like,
how did you split up with the guy you went into sobriety with?
It was, somebody asked me that recently. It's like, oh, did he break up with you? I don't really remember. I mean, it was a long time.
I separated. That was one of my first moments. I separated. A girl that I was dating came to treatment, and it was very clear that like we were no longer on the same level, and we had to split up after that. And it was like that was like one of the first hard things that I ever dealt with, you know, in sobriety.
And that was after rehab.
Yeah, I was 2 weeks sober. She came through the treatment center. And it was like the vibe was awful, and I was all in. I was all in, and this was not part of all in, because like I had been to other people before, she was still out there, you know, and so that was not who I wanted to be. So was that the situation with the guy you were dating as you got sober, or you don't remember? That's right.
Well, to be honest, I could tell that he just didn't love me anymore and probably didn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
Because I was like really sad. I was like, I could tell he wasn't interested in me anymore. And I was so sad because I thought he was my ideal. Like he looked a certain way.
That's the kind of stuff that'll knock you out.
Yeah. Yeah. But I just, we broke up, and then I got sober, and I dated I think dated is kind of a funny, I don't know if date is the right word, like hang out. I don't know. I wasn't, but I actually I had a boyfriend when I met my husband, but he wasn't sober. And it was funny because I met my husband, and it was like the more I got to know him.
In your defense, you met him at a meeting. It's not like you met him. You know what I mean? Like you got to know him, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I met him at a coffee shop. I was like,
Yeah.
I was 25. He was 24. There was a bunch of young people around us, and we were having a good time. I was drinking coffee,
Yeah.
and I was introduced to him. And like the more I got to know him, the more I really liked him, and the more I began to realize this guy I was dating wasn't it.
Yeah.
He was not it. And so, and I did the right thing. Like I broke up with him first,
Yeah.
and then I went to go date my now husband.
Well, those are the
And like
little things that you start to do in recovery that are esteemable, and you start to build your self-confidence just by doing little things that are the right thing to do that you don't want to do.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
help people through those things now today. How have you, we're talking about this person in early recovery who is starting to blossom, and now I'm not saying you don't need recovery yourself, but you're able to really give it away to keep it. How are you able to do that now?
To be perfectly honest, I mean, just be totally transparent, is I have to, well, not have to, I want to, I practice all these things that like self-care
Yeah.
is like the utmost of importance to me.
And
Like,
what does that look like for you?
yeah, I have like this elaborate morning routine that like I have a lot of free time. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I'm not expecting. I don't want anyone listening to this to think that this is what they have to do. But I do like a 5-minute journal in the morning, which is like 3 things you're grateful for, 3 things that would make the day great, a positive affirmation. And at the end of the day, you kind of 3 things that were the highlight of the day and maybe something that you learned. It's pretty simple, right? But it kind of gets my mind focused on the positive because we do have this negativity bias. Most people, it's from evolution, like our ancestors had to look for danger. So we've developed this negativity bias. So what we're really trying to do in sobriety is cultivate joy and peace and happiness. And that is by living in the realm of possibility. Right. So, there's this idea of what you think about, you bring about. So I'm very intentional about prayer and meditation. I recently discovered something called a 2-way prayer group, which has been
You told me about that. It's
blowing my
amazing.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just wild.
And it's active. There's a lot of writing involved in
Yeah,
the
you go to
group.
this meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go to this meeting
The book, The Artist's Way.
They read a little bit out of The Artist's Way. They talk about how to listen to God, right? That blew my. I was like, oh, that's right. Like we can ask for help, but if you don't listen, like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Or and how to listen, what it feels like. It's very practical. You write for 10 minutes, then they break you up in these little groups, and then you share. And the messages you get are just amazing. So I'm super into that. Physical exercise is so important.
Mm-hmm.
It is the best antidepressant that there is, and it's free. I love doing yoga, and I have a gym, so I do weights. And that really just keep like the mind body connection is just super important. So like all that stuff is really important to me.
What's the hardest thing that you've had to do in sobriety?
Oh, well, my mother, who I love, like we didn't get along when I was growing up. We became very close at the end. And a couple of years ago, she got sick and she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And um, she was sick for 22 days. And I slept next to her for every single one of those nights. And I'm so grateful I was sober because I had to give her all these really hard drugs, right? It started out with like pills, and then she decided pretty early on that she just quit eating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was giving her liquid morphine and lorazepam and all these other drugs. I don't really remember. But I was so grateful that I was sober during that time and that she trusted me. Like she told me in the beginning, she was like, I just hope it goes quick. And I just don't want to have any pain. And I was like, girl, I got you.
Yeah.
Like I got you. Don't even worry about it. And I took really good care of my mom, and it was so hard. But I tell you what, Pete, at the end, I had been certified to do hypnosis by that point.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom's sister, my Auntie Arlina, she came up from Mexico and she was like, hey, you do meditation. Can you help your mom? And I was like, okay. But I was like, you know me now. She's like, yeah, let's do it now. Because my mom was, we were at the end, and my mom's breathing was really labored, and she was struggling to let go. Like it was at the end, and
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't letting go. And so they left the room, and I was with my mom, and I put on some music with her, and I started to do like hypnosis with her. I was like separating her spirit from her body. And I was like, your spirit's getting lighter and lighter. Your body is getting heavier. Your work here is done. Your family is safe. We're all okay. It's okay to
You were
go.
able to see her
And
off.
yeah. And there was a moment, it was like this crisp fall morning, and the sun was it was a beautiful scene, and there was a lake with geese on it outside her window, and I had my eyes closed, and I could tell it was working, like her breathing was starting to slow down, and I was like, oh my God, this is actually working.
Yeah.
And I had closed my eyes and kept talking to her, and then I heard the geese lift off the water, and I opened my eyes, and she was gone. And I was like, the single most precious moment of my life, the woman who brought me into
Yeah.
this world. I got to be the one to guide her out. It was just me and her at the end. It was really sweet, and it was equal parts hard, but it was such a blessing that I got to be sober through all that.
What's the most powerful thing you have been able to attain, internally and to share with others through sobriety? Like the gift, the God-given gift that you had that sobriety enabled you to dust off and share with others.
I think it's really just being able to turn all that shame into my superpower. Like, I know what it feels like to be in your darkest hour. And I know what it's like on the other side of that. Like, I know that there is a way out. And I think just knowing who I really am in truth, like pluses and my, flaws and assets and all that stuff. Like, I know who I am now, and I love who I am now. That is probably the biggest gift. I hated who I was when I showed up, but that couldn't be further from the truth now. Like, I am so grateful for all my experiences and all the things I'm able to share with people today.
You seem very, very chill. You seem like you don't take yourself seriously, too seriously, right? I think we all have to have the ability to,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. We didn't get sober to be pushovers. That's something that I learned early in recovery and still have to practice today, as I got the people pleaser inside of me. And
Yes.
how do you stay right sized though? I mean, with your success, with 30 years of sobriety, how do you keep it green and stay the way that you are today, in the sunlight of the spirit, or right sized, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. I think just having like a regular practice of like prayer and meditation and being of service to others, that keeps me real grounded. I also have teenagers. Or, well, I guess they're not teenagers. Young men.
Yeah.
Sorry, they're not teenagers. I have young men in my life who only know me as mom. So if I'm like, oh, I had so and so on my podcast, or I got to do this or that, they're like, calm down.
How many boys do you have?
I have two boys. One is 20 and the other is almost 24.
Well, how are you able to share with them your journey of sobriety? I say that because I don't have any kids. My brother Michael got sober before me.
Oh, right. You have a nephew, right?
Well, yeah, I have a nephew and I have a niece, and my niece was really, I think, affected in an extremely positive way by my brother's sobriety. She is just, he was very open with her, very communicative. He got sober pretty much when she was 6 months old or a year old. And it was a huge part of who he was in order to be a part of her life. And then he became sort of her rock. Like how and there's weird conversations, or maybe opportunities, you would say, if you're really being zen, but to me they seem like they could be really hard. How have you been able to manage that with your kids?
Oh, so funny. I have been very open with the boys. I mean, to be perfectly honest, our lives really centered around the program. So we would have people over to the house all the time. So I'd have women come over to do work steps with me. right? My husband, for a long time had a men's meeting in our garage for years. So there was always people in the program that we were always going to somebody's house for like a milestone celebration, and it just would naturally come up in conversation. We always talked about it, like, and obviously they never saw us drink, but it was always part of the conversation. I didn't want to be one of those parents that shielded my kids from like the fun that drugs are, because you see kids go to college and they're like, oh my God, they never told me it was fun.
Yeah, it is fun for a little bit. Yeah, I mean,
all they told me was how horrible it was. But I would say, listen, this is really, this might sound unhinged, but I was like, drugs are fun. There's a reason that people do that, but you might end up with a dick in your mouth. So you might not want to do that.
That's like the most mind-bending comment, right? It's like you're live from there and you're all the way.
They're like,
but it's true.
Like,
I mean, look,
drugs are bad.
I wouldn't have done drugs as long as I did them if I didn't find them so terribly enjoyable and such a good time, right? But I also tell people I wouldn't still be sober and trying to stay connected and work in a program if that wasn't really fun. Like, I'm just the kind of guy who I'm a bit of a seeker in a sense, and I like feeling free, and so being sober and being connected is it's intoxicating for me, just like drugs were.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Listen, we have a good time.
Yeah.
Like I have never been short on a good time. But the thing is I don't have to pay the price the next day. Like, there's no price to be paid the next day. We have a good time. Trust me.
All right. I'm going to let you out of here with this last question. When a young woman comes into a meeting and or somebody, sometimes this will happen too, especially with somebody like yourself who's been sober for 3 decades now. When someone puts you in touch with a young person who's trying to figure out what the hell's going on with them in addiction and how they can find recovery, but they say, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. What do you tell them?
Yeah. I knew this milestone was coming up. And so I've been thinking a lot about like getting back to basics, what it's like to be in the beginning. I actually wrote a guide, how to quit drinking, 30 tips for your first 30 days. Like, you can go to soberlifeschool.com and just download it.
You're easy to find.
It's not
It's great. Yeah.
I thought you said I'm easy, but kind of.
You're easy to find.
To find, yes. And so I wrote this guide and I put a lot of my best tips, because there is a preparation stage before quitting. Like, you got to answer the question, can I moderate? Like, that is, maybe there's a little testing period. Some people are unclear. Like, it's important to assess where you're at, right? But so there's like the preparation phase. There's some things in it, like how do you talk to your friends and family? How do you socialize and have fun? What do you do for cravings? Like, there is a lot. There is a lot. And the thing is, lack of information in this day and age is not the issue. It's knowing what information to focus on, right? So I really tried to keep it simple and just give some basic tips that it's like a printable checklist in there as well. So I would say start there.
Now, I'm going to put all your stuff in the show notes, but for people that are listening now, where can people find you?
Yeah. So if you go to soberlifeschool.com, that's sort of like the hub. Okay. So there's some free resources there. There's a link to the podcast, the One Day at a Time Recovery.
8 years you've been doing the podcast, blazing the trail for people like me. Really, so it's appreciated.
Yeah, and that has been a blessing. It just really gives me an opportunity to talk to really cool people and have really cool experiences, and really, Pete, we are on the same mission. We are trying to alleviate unnecessary suffering, and there are solutions. There are skills that people can learn, and just sometimes little adjustments that people can make that have a big difference over the long haul. So, yeah.
Anything I left out?
Well, I did want to share just real quick that
Let's go.
I started another podcast called the Self-Help Junkie podcast, because it's a little outside of just talking about sobriety.
Yes.
Because as soon as I got sober, I was introduced to all these different teachers, right? Like Marianne Williamson, she talks about A Course in Miracles, just like, and there's all these like podcasts and books. Because people are, you get sober and you put the drink down. That's really just the beginning.
Yes.
Right. And that's when the work starts. And so there are all these teachers out there who are talking about, your mother wound or your inner child, or how to end self-sabotage, or how to reprogram your mind, how to focus. I mean, there's like a lot of information. So a girlfriend of mine did, we got together and we're like, okay, we're going to talk about these podcasts. Like I can talk to my husband like, oh my God, I heard this podcast and this is what his eyes glaze over in like 2 minutes.
No, but if you go to the source, I totally agree. I was talking to because there's specific things that we can work on, and sometimes there's not even enough time like in therapy because like I'd see a therapist once every 2 weeks. Look, if I could manage it, I should probably see her every day. But that's where I'm at now, and I weave that in with recovery. But we were talking. What'd you say?
That's what friends are for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we were talking at the end of the last session I had. We were wrapping up, and we were just talking about the regular stuff, right? Like, and she was helping me weed through that, like just what's going on in career and life. And I was like, and I kind of threw this on her, but we kind of chuckled about it. I was like, we need to start talking about my parents. Like, it's like, because of course I know that I do, and I had such a great relationship with my parents, but I know there's a ton of stuff there. My idea, my brother Kevin was a therapist, and he would say, well, maybe it wasn't so great. So there's more of something I need to kind of tap into. And I think there's an opportunity
there's so much there.
Yeah, I had the best parents in the world. And my brother Kevin would say that too. But any parent is going to, there's just something about that extreme dynamic, right? That is going to create
there is no escaping childhood without some issues, right? There just isn't. And this isn't about like an indictment of our parents, right? This is simply, it's a process of discussing the facts, how we interpreted certain situations and how we internalized it. And sometimes if we internalize information, it's like when you're 8 years old and you go to mom and you're all excited to tell her about something and she turns around and snaps at you, you walk away feeling like, oh, I'm a bad person or I'm not worthy, or, it's weird how kids, like we make decisions about ourselves when we're very young, right? Not knowing that mom had a super stressful day. She had 10 things going on. She didn't feel good. Like there was all these, but we take it personally, right? And then we walk around with this 8-year-old's decision. It's like letting an 8-year-old make decisions for you as an adult. That's like makes no sense, right? So it's important to go back and unpack all that stuff. And that's why I like the hypnosis part, because that's really something that you can go back in time. Internal family systems, that's another therapy mode that helps you deal with all that stuff from the past too in a really productive, interesting way. There's all kinds of therapies. And I just am endlessly fascinated about learning how people tick. And so we started this Self-Help Junkie podcast because there's like, you called yourself a seeker, like, oh my God, that's what we call ourselves. We're like seekers, like we're looking for answers. And so we pick a topic, we talk about what it is, why it's important, and then we come up with 3 action items so that we're actually taking action.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's the most important, like action, like, and that's why sobriety has been effective for me, because it's an action program. So that's why the 12 steps were really kind of, look, if you want to feel a certain type of way, feel fulfilled, like there's just things you have to do. And the alternative is getting drunk and maybe dying. So I'm gonna try to, now that I've gotten the fog lifting a little bit, I'm gonna try to go forward.
Yeah, you're right. The action that's where it's at. I mean, mood follows action, right? So we become like these action takers. So on the podcast, we like call out these 3 actions that we can do, and then we meet, and then you have 2 weeks to do all the actions or practices sometimes. And then at the beginning of the next podcast, we talk about, did you do them? If you did, what was the result? And if you didn't, what got in the way? And then we kind of problem solve for that. But it's amazing how we're just like in real time, my co-host Janine and I, we're like learning new things about ourselves, each other, like we're processing like in real time. It's a trip. and then we go into the next topic. So we've been talking about how to process hurt and anger, using Byron Katie's work. We talk about, I mean, just like procrastination, just all kinds of stuff. James Clear. Have you ever read a James Clear book?
No, I have
Atomic
not.
Habits.
Atomic Habits. I
Yeah.
actually bought it and I haven't even touched it. Like, that's the story of my life. I need to, and that book, by the way, I was like, that was like staring me down the other day. I will eventually get to it once I feel enough shame by like looking at it, like, and that's why.
You know what you need to do?
Yeah.
You need to listen to my episode on procrastination.
Yeah. All right. Hey, one last thing.
When we release it, I'll send it to you.
One last thing. Please do. What's the number one thing, and this is kind of off topic, that you got? I mean, you got a great husband, great family. Obviously, the work you're doing in the world it's elite. And I think whenever you're helping somebody, it's elite, especially when it's selfless. But you had a military dad. What's the number one thing you got from him? How does his personality, I would imagine he was kind of A-type, play into who you are today as a relaxed person who doesn't take themselves too seriously? What's the number one benefit you got from growing up in that house?
Oh my God. You know what's funny is my dad was the softie. Daddy was the softie. He would cry at the drop of a hat. He was super religious. He'd tell you a Bible story and start blubbering. I'd be like, get it together, man. But he was the one who gave me a love for I'll just call it God, a higher power like this. He gave me my spiritual life. God bless him.
Yeah.
Like, he gave me the capacity. Like, I grew up with knowing what a loving spiritual presence felt like, and he was safe. My father was like the most decent and honest man I had ever met. And that allowed me to receive the love from someone like my husband, his essence is very similar to that, decent and honest. Such a gift.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're the best, Arlina. Thank you so much. I kind of took you over the time, but it was well worth it. Thanks so much for listening to the Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.